Hello, welcome to today's Grid Evolution Midwest session, orchestrating the transition to a clean and modern grid in the Midwest. I'm Danielle Sass Byrnett, Center for Partnerships and Innovation Director at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, better known as NARUC, and I'll be moderating today's session. As we all know, advancements are being made in both distribution and transmission planning, but how can the Midwest coordinate these efforts to achieve cost-effective, efficient, and societally beneficial decarbonization goals as those are proliferating across the region? I'm joined today by a panel of regional experts who will walk us through how integrated distribution planning, non-wire solutions, DER aggregation, and related evolving opportunities are connecting and contributing to the modernization of the Midwest energy system. Our panelists today are Bob Richhart, Chief Technology Officer at Hoosier Energy, Emilie Tullis, Vice President of Product and General Manager, Demand Management Solutions at Uplight, and Jessica Harrison, Senior Director of R&D at MISO. We pre-recorded the first 30 minutes or so of our conversation, and then we'll roll right into live Q&A with you to answer any questions you might have. Please submit your questions through the virtual conference platform. Let's begin our discussion. As more DERs are connected to the grid, electricity planning and operations need to account for the quantity, location, capabilities, and the load and production profiles of resources on the distribution system and the bulk power system. Changes are needed to both long-standing and emerging planning processes, such as integrated resource planning, distribution system planning, and other approaches to effectively align the goals and analyses of investments to cost-effectively and efficiently meet grid requirements and customer needs and state policy goals. On February 11th, just this month, NARUC and the National Association of State Energy Officials, NASEO, supported 15 state teams in releasing materials that describe innovative visions for how electricity system planning can be improved by better aligning distribution, resource, and transmission planning activities. The Task Force on Comprehensive Electricity Planning has now published a blueprint for state action and 5 roadmaps resulting from this initiative, which included 5 states in the Midwest, contributing to a handful of the roadmaps, those named Amber, Coral, and Jade, all available on NARUC's website. Ultimately, planning is only one part of the solution, so let's turn to our panelists for today's session for a Midwest-specific view of how planning and operations can and should evolve on the ground. After we hear these key points, we'll get into questions for our speakers. I'm going to start with you, Jessica. What opportunities does the proliferation of these solutions and planning disciplines afford MISO and how it supports regional grid modernization efforts?
Well, thank you. I think it's a fun time to be in the industry right now because there's a lot going on, and I think we're seeing multiple trends changing how the assumptions that we used to have for how we operated and how we planned. And so I think it's critical to make sure that we rethink, for example, the risks that we're trying to manage in our planning process. We know that the profiles of risk are changing as well as the magnitude of risk. So we need to make sure that we're accounting for that explicitly in all of the planning and even the operations pieces. With that, we have the potential of new tools and technologies to help us with that uncertainty management, whether it's sort of, again, longer term planning versus short term operating tools. And I think, again, it's caused and driven by many factors. And so we'll want to figure out, and maybe I'll add another point there. For MISO in particular, we're 15 different states that we cover, right, plus portions of Canada. And so the pace and the nature of this change is very different across that footprint. So the question is, how can we have common tools that are robust for a variety of different types of uncertainty and variability that we're seeing in different risk profiles? And then the technologies themselves, I don't think there's one single answer. We'll have an opportunity for different states as they deploy different technologies to figure out how they coordinate. So I would say it's an opportunity, but also something we have to be really cognizant of in the methods that we're using for planning.
Absolutely. There are a lot of things going on. You've articulated that well. Thank you. Bob, can you talk a little bit about how Hoosier Energy is considering and incorporating these concepts to support the efforts of your member utilities? And do you have any examples you could share with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As we have talked with our members, one piece of this in terms of future planning related to widely distributed resources across, transmission and distribution systems and even behind the retail meter is the communication system itself. So we have entered into a planning process and a process where we actually sit down with our 18 members multiple times throughout the year and talk about expansion of wired and wireless, so fiber expansion and wireless solutions. A key factor for us in those discussions is how are you going to connect all of these distributed resources and just the wide variety, as Jessica mentioned, a wide variety of resources, especially at the retail consumer end, that could be added to this system. And so several of our members have embarked upon broadband to the retail consumer, the member consumer. Others have not, but many have partnered with third parties in terms of communication systems. So here at Hoosier, we have been working with members to build one integrated plan. And the concept there is, as we replace aging infrastructure for Hoosier Energy, which includes our digital microwave system, which is decades old at this point, we are adding fiber. Many of our members are adding fiber. And so this process is allowing us to bridge gaps between our 18 members and with Hoosier as we go. And we see this as a vehicle which will enable us as we start to see more and more distributed resources, that show up at the distribution level or on the grid. And, in the beginnings here, electric vehicle chargers are something we're very focused on, and getting level 2 chargers into the homes of the retail member consumer with our members. And so another point of focus with that in the system is how do you integrate those and at some point connect those to storage, connect those through other smart devices in the home, even the meter itself. And so because of all of that and the complexity of that and the need for the communications piece, we've become very focused on that integrated communication system development.
Excellent. Let's come back to that in a couple of minutes. Thanks, Bob. I want to give Emilie a chance to jump in. And Emilie, I'll ask a similar question of you. What are your thoughts to how solution providers such as Uplight can be creating additional opportunities for utility clients? And could you offer some examples?
Sure. So our approach at Uplight is really to help utilities achieve grid modernization through integrated solutions that can really adequately address the complexities of a truly integrated resource plan. So we're loving seeing more utilities commit to IRPs. When I look at some of the IRPs with aggressive fossil fuel retirement goals and lofty renewable commissioning goals, kind of the implicit third leg of that stool is demand side management. And that's kind of what my area of focus is. To use consumers in Michigan as an example, their Clean Power Plan has almost a 1-for-1 replacement of coal and natural gas with renewables. But they also are increasing their DR portfolio from 10% to over 20% right in lockstep. So to fulfill this kind of goal, we think about how we get more out of DR resources, to think about them as more than just DR events, and to recruit customers into that transformation with worthwhile value propositions that make them want to participate. So using TOU as an example, even there at consumers, we all know TOU rates can be a great tool for managing load reliability and helping with things like integrating solar to squash the duck curve. But we also know that energy wonks and cost-conscious customers are really the only ones who will sign up for that type of rate if there's not a PUC mandate. So to get the load shift that utilities are actually looking for, we really need to do more than just say, guess what, you're on a TOU rate, here's a postcard that describes it, and just kind of wash our hands and move on. We really need to offer solutions and tools that can manage their energy in the background, that can help them understand their consumption, and also tailor offers to them that meet customers where they are. So if you have maybe a renter, you don't want to offer them big rebates on infrastructure and appliances that they're not going to actually have the latitude to replace. If you have customers that do have a really high load during a peak period, that's something that we as Uplight can identify by looking at their load profile and tailor an offer to them that says you might be a better fit for this rate, or critical peak pricing or something along those lines. So really, it involves having an entire set of offerings, all of which in the back end are funded by different utility budgets, and having it feel like one solution to the customer and one continuous energy journey.
Thank you very much, Emilie. Customizing for the customer is, of course, a really important part of what happens in every retail space. I wanted to move us to a discussion and get your thoughts, each of you in turn, about some additional questions in this space. I'll go to Bob, then Jessica, then Emilie. On what role or how important do you think it is for collaboration and transparency to be occurring across grid operations to build this new grid that you all are describing in the Midwest?
Well, that's a great question. You know, coming from a co-op or being at a co-op throughout my career, as you can imagine, cooperation and collaboration are pretty darn important. It's kind of foundational for us. And so as we work with our members, and over the years, actually, we've done a lot of work and had a lot of partnerships with the various investor-owned utilities, and certainly with MISO and other groups across the industry. But this is a particular path going forward in terms of the distributed resources where I think it is absolutely critical. And the reason I say that is because we have so many varied types of loads and resources now. When you start thinking about what DER and distributed resources could really look like, it kind of runs the gamut, right? It's at all scales, all levels, and can be anywhere on the system. So this is going to involve planning and execution on the distribution system side. Again, we have 18 member systems that do their own planning process, and as they rebuild their systems, you have to start to think about where some of those resources are going to lie. And so we at the GNT, you know, we want to be thinking about that holistically in terms of where those resources are at, member by member, how they all interconnect from a power system perspective, and then back to my original point, how they interconnect from a communications perspective. You know, our sense is that folks at MISO are going to be very interested in us verifying that a particular resource is online, and you know what its capabilities are. And when all of a sudden you have hundreds or maybe thousands of those across southern Indiana, we see that being a really important piece of how we coordinate with all of our member systems as those are added.
Jessica, I think he's handing it off to you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think this is really a fundamental piece of making the grid of the future work. I think we've had standard ways that we've been able to collaborate before, but we're going to be pressed to do more and do better. With that, I think there's a lot of different forms of collaboration, right? I think we can talk about, again, what are integration models that are efficient. We don't want to, just because you have information doesn't mean you want to share it all, right? So how much information is appropriate to share to whom, when, making sure we have frameworks that fit across, again, multiple different states, and but that we have the core components there. And then with that, I also think there's ideally, sort of thinking out further, chances for automation. So if we've got control and communication technologies, how do we leverage those and integrate those so that we're automating the information and we're making this as efficient again as possible? So I think we've just gotten started. I know there's technologies out there, I know there's conversations out there, but I don't know that we've landed on sort of a single framework just yet. And I also think it's going to likely continue to evolve because the technologies themselves are still evolving. So to me, it's going to be something to focus on now, but continually as sort of capabilities change.
Yeah, I think from the vendor or solution provider perspective, there are kind of different layers of collaboration. I think an important one for us as a SaaS company, we're trying to deliver cost-effective, repeatable solutions, but each utility has their own challenges, their own regulatory environment, that sort of thing, and their own business goals. So it's really important for us to dig in with a given utility and kind of talk across all the silos and figure out how we can get creative to tie together, energy efficiency budgets, customer anything that's happening in kind of the CCO's office, how do we make these comprehensive solutions that really address everyone's problems and work within their filings and their budgets. At a kind of a larger scale, working with groups like MISO, working with state commissioners, we have one customer similar to what Bob is talking about, where they're actually spanning 2 states. And so they have some unique challenges of kind of satisfying 2 different regulatory environments. So really understanding those conditions and also sharing, kind of acting as a somewhat impartial advocate for different utilities to go speak to PUCs and say, we did this program here in this state. What do you think about doing that for, a neighboring utility that's in the same jurisdiction? So sharing that information, just, we are in a unique environment where, outside of some of the retailers, we can collaborate more. We're not necessarily competitive with each other. And I think we all have the goal of maintaining a strong business and also serving our customers and moving towards the grid modernization and energy justice initiatives that are out there. So I think it's really important. It's far more efficient, and I'm definitely excited about, as Jessica mentioned, figuring out what data we can share and what more opportunities we have.
Fantastic. Thank you all. I also wanted to key off of what you were just saying, Emilie, about grid modernization opportunity and leveraging the techniques and the space that Uplight and others occupy, to ask, what do you think is one grid mod opportunity that will have the biggest effect on the grid over the next 5 years or so? And then Bob and Jessica, I'll turn to you as well.
So my answer is probably not going to be very surprising. I really think bringing energy consumers into the fold as part of our solution. To integrate renewables, to move towards a distributed generation model, we really need to look at whether the effects of supply side levers are as effective as they used to be, and really getting into paying attention to the demanders of the capacity that we're all trying to manage. And that's our customers. That is, both on the residential side, small, medium business, C&I, they all have their own unique challenges and unique opportunities. And I think that is going to be really key beyond when we move past just throwing another natural gas plant.
Yeah, and so I would add on to that. I think a specific example that comes to mind quickly for me, and it's because I can see the value for the end consumer, for electric vehicles, and for the environment, and all that goes with that. But folks are, as we have this charger program with our members, we see folks at the end of the line that still have concerns about range. There's still the range anxiety and concerns about where they're going to charge their vehicles, when they're on the road. And that infrastructure piece, that's coming, but that's one factor. The other thing that I think will help that, to spur that on, is if you have companies, and I'm thinking of companies that have medium to large size fleets, that they are thinking of converting to electric. And if they do that, when they start to do that, to me, naturally, the extension of that is you find an opportunity to combine renewable resources, solar, what have you, and storage possibly in a site like that. So you have a distributed resource all of a sudden that has scale on a regional level, and you've got the ability to work through the peak demand periods, with the use of the batteries. Even if the fleet is not all there at the same time, you have those batteries available that become a resource as a storage piece. They can be charged from the renewable resource during the day and then available during peaks and at night. And you can recharge the EVs themselves. And then all of those at some point become a resource in terms of the grid and supplying the grid. And so I'm excited about, the first opportunity like that's coming. And I do believe that's coming in the not too distant future.
Thanks, Bob. Jessica?
Yeah, my perspective is somewhat different, obviously, when we're at the place that we're sitting. So I think from our perspective, whatever comes will come, and we're excited about it. The question is, how do we make it reliable and effective, right? And that's where I do think some of these communication technologies and the automation of coordination will be really fundamental to making sure that we're getting the most benefit for everybody in the grid, no matter how they're operating. With that, of course, we have a perspective that markets can be helpful there, at least in terms of signaling specifically what's needed. And we're focused right now, I think that in the short term, we'll end up with probably more dynamics on the grid, more variability and uncertainty. And I think that's an okay thing as long as we figure out how to respond to that. So the traditional method of planning for a single summer peak and expecting static load is just not going to work, right? So then the question is, what tools do you have to make the most out of that new capability, and how do we figure out again how we're coordinating across multiple layers of the grid now? I think again there's steps there, but we're not quite there yet, and I think the next few years will be really important for discussions on how to do that and where to focus.
Yeah, I think if it's okay with you, Danielle, I'd love to kind of tie together what Bob and Jessica said. You know, when we think about EVs are obviously a huge load that is coming onto the grid, and we're all really excited about those electrification efforts. But at the same time, you know, if your traditional grid peak is 3 to 6 p.m., there's a good chance that most of those EVs, at least on the residential side, are not even going to be plugged in and charging at the time that you would want to leverage them. So how do we look at, you know, not just conceptually, how could these resources be used, but how can they actually be used? You know, how does Jessica use her EV differently than how Bob uses his EV, and what does that mean for the grid? And I think, you know, the vendors out there are kind of on the hook for, be it a DERMS provider or the EV charger companies themselves, like we're on the hook for helping utilities get better insight into what is actually happening with those DERs. And doing something useful with them, and to Jessica's point, making them reliable, making them dispatchable, and making them extensible.
Yeah, I would, if I may, I'd just add to that. You know, in terms of the question, so my response was thinking about one of the larger impacts, but I would go back and say, you know, what I heard from Jessica in terms of the communications piece, she's absolutely right. I mean, that is an area where we've got to gain experience, and it's the integration that both of you, all of us are talking about here. And so we certainly see the value of doing some small residential or commercial battery charger, like I say, other smart devices in the home, thermostats, whatever those may be, integrations, because that's what we have to learn how to do. It's, you know, related to the DERM system and the communications piece. We have to figure out how to be really good at making all of those things, even to bring your own device situation, right, in the home. They all have to work together, and they all have to be reliable.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of work happening on interoperability across the region, and you've got some really leading the efforts in Minnesota, for example, around revising interconnection standards and making sure that there's clarity about how DERs are expected to connect and respond from a communications perspective as well. There's a lot of different pieces here to leverage, and Jessica, as you were talking, I was thinking about different approaches to scenario planning and stochastic models for how we envision and how we identify what the bounds are of the risks, as you were saying, and therefore what the opportunities and the solutions might look like. This is a very exciting discussion. It's certainly a very exciting time to be part of all of this for all of us, I imagine, and our colleagues. I wanted to ask, before we transition to Q&A, if there are any specific resources you might want to recommend to the audience as they're considering their own next steps in this space. Emilie, then
Sure.
Jessica, then Bob.
So I think we have a wealth of resources available on the Uplight website that are really geared more towards just kind of sharing our solutions, so less salesy and more just like, how do you actually implement this type of connected solution at your utility? What does it mean? And really, you know, kind of talking about the crawl, walk, run pathway of, you know, we may want to get to a point where, you know, I got into this space because I was just like, why isn't everybody on real-time pricing? Let's just do it. And I had to learn the hard lesson of like, because that would be terrible for most people. So, you know, how do we kind of get to the point where we can meet these loftier grid modernization goals that each utility has, and do it in a way that is measured, is reliable, is, you know, low latency, all the things that Jessica needs on the MISO side. So I encourage folks to check those out.
We're in the middle of preparing for the latest FERC Order 2222 on distributed energy resources, and in preparation for that, we're actually facilitating a series of workshops with our stakeholders and trying to get broad participations to represent, again, vendors, customers, distribution focused folks, as well as the TOs and the usual folks. So there's actually a lot of materials coming out of that, and I encourage folks to take a look at that. That's at misoenergy.org. And then with that, we also have reports that we're starting to put out in terms of understanding better where customers, vendors, and stakeholders are headed in our region, and also what that means for markets and the functions that we do. So encourage people to go to our website, and then obviously interested in feedback as they read through that.
Yeah, and just to tag on to that, I would give a nod to MISO's website and their training as well. Myself and our staff have certainly been engaging and making use of a lot of the education they're available at MISO. Along with that, our website at HoosierEnergy.com, we have links to all 18 of our members in the EV Charger Initiative to see what's going on there and how that's becoming a part of the future grid itself. There's a Choose EV website for all 18 individual websites for each of the 18 members, in addition to the information on Hoosier Energy. And as we continue to progress and work with our members in terms of building out the communication system, and then how that, how that plays in terms of the integrated planning between transmission and distribution, that will be on our website as well. So I would encourage folks to use that resource as well.
Great, thank you all. We will drop those websites into the chat or provide links to our audience. And I just want to share the website for the NARUC-NASIO Task Force on Comprehensive Electricity Planning for the Blueprint for State Action and related resources, which is naruc.org/taskforce. And at this point, we're going to go see what kind of questions we have from our audience members. Thank you very much.